Well, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, my lovely students, and welcome to History 1182. Man, it's so odd because probably many of you are listening to this recording in January, and it's probably about 5 degrees out, and it's gray, and it's dark, and it's totally unlike when I'm recording this. I'm recording this on August 1st. I'm sitting on my front porch, my screened-in front porch, looking out at all the green. I'm barefoot in shorts. So, how ironic. Okay, enough of that. I have to give you the essential questions for this presentation. And, wow, this stuff is not familiar to a lot of you. The great thing about this course, though, is we're going to go from the unfamiliar up to the extremely familiar, because by the time we're done, right around graduation time, we're going to come up right into the contemporary world, which is awesome. So here's the essential questions for this presentation. The first one is, why was the Indian Ocean such a vibrant commercial area in the year 1450? We're going to learn about all the amazing trade that was taking place in this vital body of water. Number 2, we're going to talk about China. We're going to talk about this massive, important country that reasserts itself, claims its national identity, and then that national identity is immediately threatened once again. So number 3, we have to deal with this fascinating topic of xenophobia. And what the heck is xenophobia? Very powerful concept, not just then, but today as well. And finally, we're going to talk about how the Industrial Revolution in Europe impacted China, the region. The impact is going to be profound. So buckle up, people. Let's get started. Hey, one thing that I think is kind of cool, and I neglected to mention this in the previous recording because I just listened to my recording. I said, oh, wow, you can hear the cicadas in the background. That's what that sound is. Those are bugs, man. And they're asleep when you're listening to this. They're buried under ice and snow. Hallelujah. Okay, so let's get to this. We're going to start this class in 1450. And we're going to start this class in a really cool place, which is the Indian Ocean. Now, the Indian Ocean, as you can see in this map here, is such a strategic body of water, and strategic means in a very important place. I mean, look up here, you have India, the second largest country in the world today, and it was huge back then as well. And then you have China over here to the upper right. China is the largest nation in the world today. So these are huge population centers. And this Indian Ocean acts like this massive interstate highway system of trade. Now, before we go any further, I want to show you a couple more places. You have India up here, you have China over here, but you also have Malaysia, Indonesia, the Arabian Peninsula, and East Africa. These are hugely significant areas. In between modern Malaysia and Indonesia, there's this important strait called the Strait of Malacca, which is this narrow through where all this trade worked its way through. Now, it's kind of interesting. There were important ships that were used to conduct this trade. I'm going to show you a picture of each right now. There is the Malay Zhong, the Arab Dhow, and the Chinese Junk. These were the ships that traversed this amazing body of water in 1450, and this trade was vibrant. So understand how this body of water was an important center of the world in 1450. Hallelujah. One thing that a lot of American students don't really grasp is how incredibly advanced Islamic society was in comparison to Europe prior to the Industrial Revolution. Now, when you think about the Arab world, you're thinking about Western Asia, Northern Africa, Southeastern Europe. So this part of the world prior to the European Industrial Revolution was the technological technologically most advanced part of the world. Now that had a big impact on trade in the Indian Ocean. And there were two reasons for that. When countries become affluent, wealthy, the demand for foreign products goes through the roof. That's what you see in the United States. I mean, most of us consume mass quantities of products from other countries. I know I certainly do. I know you do too. Come on, man. So that's one thing. Tremendous demand in the Arab world for products from places like China and India and Malaysia and Southeast Asia. The other thing is this incredible desire to spread the Islamic faith. Many of you have heard the term evangelism before in relation to Christianity, the concept of being a missionary and going out to a place and converting people and helping people. Same thing is true in Islam. So not only do you have this tremendous desire for products outside the Arab world, the Islamic world I should say, but you also have this tremendous drive to spread the Islamic faith. Now let's get specific and focus on the incredibly important place called China. Now, if you took 1181, Mr. Sturdivant just loved talking about that character called Shi Huangdi, who was the leader of the Qin dynasty for a very brief period of time. And then after that, there was a period of stability under a dynasty called the Han Dynasty, which ruled China from 200 BCE to 200 CE. And then China went through some various phases of dynasties, but none matched the grandeur of the mighty Han. So China went through a period of relative decline, not incredible decline, but there was a period of decline. That all changed in the 1200s with the arrival of the Mongols, who came in and torched the place and occupied China for about 100 years. Now, we're going to start focusing on China in the year 1368, because that is the year that the Ming Dynasty overthrows the hated outsiders, the hated Mongols, and gives China its identity back. Now, one thing about these Ming monarchs is they are obsessed with trade with the outside world and trade across the Indian Ocean, and so they're going to be hyper-focused on controlling this trade. When the Ming took over in China in 1368, China had just been through this extremely humiliating phase of its history where it was dominated by outsiders. In this case, the Mongols. So they reacted in a very interesting way. Now, we just had this presidential campaign in 2016 in which one of the candidates, Donald Trump, obviously, had a slogan which was "Make America Great Again." In other words, there was this feeling that we needed to reassert our prestige and authority, and this message was popular with many voters. Now, the Ming went through something like this. What they did, not long after they took power, was really interesting and really cool. Now, you might remember a similar episode in American history. There was a guy by the name of Teddy Roosevelt who had this massive flotilla of impressive naval vessels that he sent around the world. It was called the Great White Fleet. And ostensibly this was for a goodwill mission, but obviously it was to impress potential allies and intimidate potential adversaries and show the world that, hey, America's power is here. Well, the Chinese went through something very similar to that. The Ming fleets were expeditions that took place between 1405 and 1433. Now, if you read this part in the book, this utterly fascinated me. The size of these expeditions was tremendous. But before I get to the size, let me tell you what the goal was. The goal was to reconnoiter the Indian Ocean, means scout around, find out what's out there. It's to create some important commercial ties that could serve China in the future. But a big part of it was to intimidate potential adversaries. to let them know that China was back in charge of its own country and that it was serious about defending itself and projecting its power. Now we'll talk about size. The size of these ships was large by today's standards. I don't know if you remember this from the reading, but these ships were as long as a football field, which is really hard to fathom how big these ships were. One expedition carried 27,000 passengers with it, which included military units, entire military units. Now, the admiral is a guy by the name of Zheng He, who was, interestingly enough, a Muslim. And so he was familiar with the lay of the land. So I want you to understand that these voyages were to establish these commercial ties, intimidate future potential enemies, and they came into contact with India, the Arab Peninsula, the east coast of Africa. This was a massive projection of Chinese power. Now, it's important at this juncture to lay a term on you that's hugely significant in China, but it's also been significant in the United States, too, as of late, obviously, with the past election. This term is xenophobia. It has Greek origins, and it means a fear of foreigners or outsiders. Now, often this fear is couched in terms of superiority, this feeling like we're better than everybody else. But one thing you have to understand is this is not a uniquely American thing. And later Ming monarchs came to the conclusion that they were extending themselves too far out into the world. That if China wasn't careful, they're going to have all these outsiders come in and dilute their culture, just like when the Mongols came in and took over. So there's this intense fear of outsiders that started to manifest itself in the later parts of these Ming fleet expeditions, and they just shut it down. And they said, no, we don't want to deal with, as they said, barbarians, outside barbarians, who are not worthy of Chinese culture. Now, this fear of outsiders is going to be a primary phenomenon in Chinese history all the way to the present. So it's real important that you understand how powerful it was even back in the 14th century. The Ming controlled China from 1368 to 1644. That's almost 300 years, which, believe it or not, is not that long for a Chinese dynasty. But in the words of Donald Trump, they made China great again. They kicked out the Mongols and brought back Chinese pride. But the empire, the dynasty, was short-lived. You might remember in the reading that they did have to cope with environmental problems. China went through a mini ice age, which devastated agriculture. And most Chinese people at the time were rural. But here's two traditional threats to a monarch in China. When you have some chaos, like was wreaked with the small ice age, what you have is the emergence of strong national, provincial rulers who are going to challenge the monarch. So that's one. And then the other thing is China has traditionally dealt with external threats, often from the north and from the west. So the combination of these two things, local, provincial leaders asserting their authority and external threats, did the Ming Dynasty in. So here's the thing, man. The Ming Dynasty is in a vice. It has hostile forces to the north, hostile forces to the west, local provincial leaders are trying to assert themselves, and then the Japanese invade Korea in the 1590s, which is going to put a lot of pressure on them. Now, basically all the military activity, all the threats are in the northern half of China. So one interesting byproduct of this is this mass migration of Chinese to Southeast Asia, to the prosperous areas benefited by the Indian Ocean trade, like Malaysia and Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam. So this tremendous migration of ethnic Chinese. And then the other thing that happened, which is really interesting, the Ming Dynasty recruited a group of people to help them defeat the Japanese in Korea. This group of people were the Manchus from northeast of China up in a province called Manchuria, but they were different than Chinese. They spoke a different language. Now, just like in History 1181 with the Mamluk Turks, when you get someone to help you fight your battles, often these people might turn on you once those battles are won, which is exactly what happened. The Manchus helped the Ming defeat the Japanese in Korea and then eventually attacked and destroyed the Ming Dynasty. The Manchus saved China from Japanese invasion, and so they took over the country as compensation. And this became the Qing Dynasty. Now, the Qing Dynasty did a lot of things that the Ming Dynasty did very successfully. They pacified the nation. In other words, they made sure to secure the borders, both in the north and the west, and even the northeast in terms of Korea. They made China great again. And then they focused a lot on infrastructure. I think you might remember from 1181 the Great Magic Canal that linked the north-flowing rivers with the south-flowing rivers in China, built by Shi Huangdi. Well, they went in and they rebuilt this canal. It was a tremendous sense of national pride. The emperor by the name of Kangxi, who ruled from 662 to 722, is a perfect example of a Qing monarch. Now, this is going to set up this situation, this very odd situation that takes place throughout Chinese history. It's not unusual to name a king when they are extremely young, and then regents, advisors to the king, can influence that king to the point where they are the de facto leaders of the country. Well, Kangxi actually had the wherewithal, when he was about your age to see this coming, had all of them executed, which is going to be another tradition in Chinese history, executing of regents. Now, one thing that the Qing Dynasty did, which was unfortunately a lot like the Ming Dynasty, is they had this incredible xenophobia, and they had this disdain for anything that was non-Chinese. So they set up this port in southern China called Canton. And this port city of Canton is the only place where products from the outside can come through. And that's going to be a major source of contention for the foreseeable future. The Qing xenophobia is a heck of a lot more serious than the Ming xenophobia. And that's because the world is evolving. This is the 1700s, the 18th century. And what's going on in Europe is the Industrial Revolution. So Europe is spiking in terms of its technological evolution. And this technological evolution is going to give them advantage over the rest of the world, particularly in terms of their military technology. So while the Qing Chinese are sitting there with their air of superiority, and they're feeling that they can't interact with the outside world because the outside world is barbaric and will dilute them, is actually falling behind the rest of the world in terms of technology. And when these military conflicts come, they're going to come, the Chinese are going to be fighting with outdated military technology, and they're going to get wasted. So this xenophobia at this point is incredibly debilitating. So you might be asking the question, what was the big deal about China? Why was it such an important place? I'm going to bounce a number off of you. The population in China in the year 1800 was 350 million. That's more people than are in the United States today. Now, you need to put this in perspective. The world population in 1800 was 1 billion. So 35% of them lived in one country, and 350 million people is more people than lived in the entire continent of Europe. So these people who lived in this nation were seen as a tremendous market to purchase industrial products from Europe, because that's part of it. The other part is they had this unique product that was very popular in Europe, and that was tea. And so the combination of having a product that everyone loved, probably were addicted to, and having the ability to purchase lots and lots of European manufactured products made China exceptionally attractive to Western Europeans. You see, in the late 1700s and the early 1800s, the United Kingdom is the world's superpower. They have this massive navy. It's an economic empire based on trade. And what bothered the British about the Chinese is the trade was very unequal. British bought a lot of tea from China. China showed absolutely no interest whatsoever in Britain's manufactured products. Now, the Chinese emperor, the Qing emperor, his name was Shi Yanglun, and he was in power from 1736 to 1796. In 1793, the British sent Lord George Macartney to China to visit with the emperor and see if he could talk him into loosening up and buying some British products. But in this meeting, arrogance just abounded. And the first thing Macartney did is he refused to kowtow to the emperor. Now, if you're not sure what a kowtow is, I'm going to demonstrate. This is how you kowtow to the Chinese emperor. You don't look the person in the eye. They are a living god. Head bowed, approach, face on the floor. Bravo. Lord Macartney was unsuccessful in getting the Qing monarch to loosen up. But he wasn't alone, man. Other European countries came and tried the same tactic to no avail. Here is the message that the Qing emperor sent the King of England. China has no need to increase its foreign trade and no use for Britain's ingenious devices and manufactures, and set no value on closer diplomatic ties. So they just said the heck with it. They're not interested. And what's really important here is that China desperately needs this trade. This burgeoning population of 350 million people was wearing out their resources. They were in desperate need of housing. Because of deforestation in China to build these houses, there just wasn't wood available. They were terracing mountainsides in order to have a place to grow crops. They desperately needed food. So this arrogance on the part of the British for not kowtowing, and arrogance on the part of the Chinese for not loosening up and buying some foreign products, hurt both nations. And there's a big showdown coming. Stay tuned.